Thank you. I'm Stephanie Jane Edwards. I work at the State Broadband Office, and this is my colleague, Ben Shelton, who works in the Center for Geographic Information Analysis. And we're going to talk to you as clearly as we can about what we're up to in the broadband efforts for our state and how we would like to recruit you for help and insights and hear your voices on how to make the most of the resources that we have coming available for this work. Thank you. So this introduction is just a little bit to give you an idea of the incredible opportunity headed our way. The gist of it is kind of like it's a tsunami of funding at the federal level coming to our state as an opportunity to tackle broadband. And we have sister offices, an infrastructure office for broadband and a digital equity and literacy office, and we work in tandem. And the bottom line is our mission is to give everyone in North Carolina the opportunity to access broadband and utilize it to make their lives better. So we're excited about that. You can see there are some programs coming up that some of which are in the midst of being designed right now, which are intended to occur in waves that we think will tackle trouble spots on broadband across our state. So I'm going to show a slide next that's a little bit about the GREAT grant, which you may have heard about from this past year. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the CAB program, and that is going to be kind of a reverse model where communities come up with projects instead of the telecom industry. And so then we'll put projects out to bid for the telecom industry instead of companies coming up with what they want to tackle, which is not a bad thing, but we need a little different perspective sometime. We have a $1 million mapping budget. I know just by looking at us, you probably cannot tell Ben and I are millionaires, but it says so right here that we have a good amount of resources, though finite, to kind of equip everyone who's tackling broadband access on behalf of our state at the local and state level with good data and good collaboration and good maps above all. So there's also a $50 million budget for our specifically digital equity work. This is to give you a little bit of an idea. It's sort of a laundry list of eligible activities that are eligible expenses for what we call BEAD funding. BEAD is the federal program coming up from the Infrastructure Act that is funding our work. We're putting that together with American Recovery Plan money that has gone into this GREAT grant program. So you see at the top of the list, essentially, is infrastructure for homes and businesses and anchor institutions like schools and libraries and healthcare organizations. We are mapping and doing a lot of data collection, which you'll hear more about, and we are trying to support good analysis for multifamily dwellings, and we're trying to support broadband adoption. That includes efforts around affordability. We are partnering with some trusted experts across the state on training and workforce development because broadband has a strong intersection with a lot of different facets of community life that you may be really familiar with from your roles across the state. And that includes workforce development, utilizing technology, and we are combining that with digital equity work to make sure people have not only the skills for workforce development and for other things, but also access to devices and access to infrastructure wherever they live and work. There's also prisoner education, and a better way of phrasing that, I think, is equipping people for re-entry who are former incarcerated individuals. And digital navigators is a term that we're using a lot. You may be familiar with folks who are staffed and equipped at the library. excuse me, and who are ready to guide people wherever they are in accessing the internet for their needs. So it could be an unpredictable scenario with digital literacy training or how to access a certain website for civic engagement or job applications. And where we are now in our timeline with all of this work is the second dot right here. We are here, and we have been working since last year preparing for this funding that's being announced from the NTIA. And we have until June of this year for coordinating and gaining input from communities and stakeholders across the state. And that's not the only time frame that we have, but we're trying to put together an asset inventory across the state and a plan that we'll be proposing mid-year. And then we're going to have kind of a back and forth process to perfect that plan and to enhance it with the best and most current available data, plus the best and most current input from folks like yourselves throughout the next couple of years as we move into implementing these plans and really targeting spots in the state that need help the most in the ways that they need help the most. This is just kind of visual for the GREAT grant program that I mentioned earlier, because it is $350 million from ARPA that we were distributing across the state as an office to tackle areas in each county that were previously what we call unserved by broadband. It means that broadband or high-speed internet at least 25 megabits down and 3 megabits per second up and higher were not available. And you don't necessarily need to remember that if you're not familiar with these terms and these thresholds, but we have certain definitions we work by. And so using our fantastic statewide GIS reference data like Address NC, we are able to catalog address by address where we have awarded potential funding contingent on building out infrastructure to these locations. So we've announced $272 million of this funding, and there's going to be some more announcements coming out soon for the remainder of the funding as we're looking at those applications. And this CAB program that I mentioned coming up will be a great way for people in each of our counties to participate in identifying trouble spots that might not already be well reflected in our data, and kind of creating custom fit infrastructure projects that we look to get addressed by telecom companies in our state. And so the county or local government will chip in some funding, the state will chip in some funding, and the ISPs will contribute funding as well to make these projects attainable. And those will have a 5-year build cycle. And to support work like this, we have to have the best available data, and there's been a whole lot happening in the coming months that we just want to make sure you know about as we're moving forward. And Ben's going to explain how we're making some progress on the reference data that we can use and that you can use to talk about, to have these conversations.
Thanks, Stephanie Jane. So typically in the past, what we've had to rely on is data from the FCC, what was called the Form 477 data. It's census block based, so if one location within that census block is served, that whole census block is listed as served from the provider reported data that the FCC was collecting. And so that greatly overstated. We implied that it was greatly overstated. And with the last release, it shows there were 70,000 households at that unserved level. So that's that not having access to 25/3 service from any provider terrestrial. And then there's the underserved areas as well. That was 124,000. So as you can see in this map, the census block base kind of paints a rosy picture. It looks pretty good. Oh, we're getting there. We just have some pockets we need to address. But now with the FCC's new data that they've released last November, they get down to the more address level, granular level of provider reported service availability across the state. And then when you look at that map compared to this one, you can see the problem is much more widespread than what the previous maps were showing. This is a tremendous more widespread locations throughout the state that need access to broadband. They need improved infrastructure to be able to access all those services that Stephanie Jane had mentioned. So using this new data, it is a licensed data. The FCC went out and got a contractor, CostQuest, that put together this location fabric data. So it combined addresses and parcels and building footprints to identify locations that are serviceable by broadband. So it's not like a public library. That's not mass market internet subscribers. So they're focusing on businesses and residences that want to subscribe and can subscribe to internet. And so that's what we've put together here, is a look at all those unserved and underserved locations. Now, this is a licensed data set, so we can't just go and give this out to everybody who wants it. We can't just allow this to be downloaded. We can put it into maps based on the licensing. But what we've done and we've been working on the past couple months is aggregating those unserved locations into a hex bin model using a H3 Python library. And so using that, so every time you create these hex bins, it all comes in the same location every time for that scale. And so we have 3 different resolutions of these hex bins that we're putting out publicly, and they are available on NC1 Map now as streaming map services, where you can really clearly see a bivariate kind of symbolization of unserved locations in North Carolina. And what the bivariate map is showing you here is 2 different variables. There's a count of unserved, so that's the pink areas. So if you see like Eastern Wake County, there's some pink hexagons there. Those are high counts of unserved, but it's not a high percentage within that bin of all locations. The blue is the percent of those locations in each bin that are unserved. So if you see darker blue along the coast, those are high percentages. Every home in that bin is probably unserved, but it's not a very high count relative to the rest of the state. And then when you combine those 2 variables, the darker the purple, that means there is both a high count and a high percentage in that bin that are not served by 25.3 service. And so with that, you can kind of drill down, and when you get to the more granular steps, you look at a county level, we have a different hex bin scale, and you can see really clearly where the funding sources are. So the cross-hatching is the federally funded areas, mostly RDOF, which is the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. And then we have the green dots, which is the great grants that Stephanie Jane highlighted. And with that, you can see where funding is in relation to those unserved areas, but then you see the Northeast up there in Sampson County, or the Northwest, excuse me, I'm backwards. Northwest, you can see there's a big pocket of unserved locations in those bins up there that this is just defined by the 25.3 advertised speeds from the FCC. That they're not getting any funding currently. And so if we have new programs, those could be some areas that we need to focus on. And I will mention that these maps may be evolving as we change our North Carolina definition of unserved. So what the FCC defines as unserved is any terrestrial fixed wireless with 25.3 or greater. Well, we may define that as, well, if the home only has DSL service and it is reported as 25.3, well, we want to make that unserved as well. Or if there's certain technologies we know aren't future-proof, cannot scale to that 100 symmetrical speed that we're really looking for, then we can change the definition of unserved for some future programs. And these maps will be updated once we get those policy decisions in place. But right now you can go to NC1 Map, and for all 100 counties, there's a map for every county out there. You can download that as a static PDF. Or you can bring these images in, and we have a couple different online applications that show that. So I just wanted to show a couple different examples. So that was Sampson County, this is Polk County. You can see the problem when you get down to the granular level is pretty clear. And you can see the amount of great grants that are going into Polk County. We are addressing a lot of those areas with the current funding that was put in place last year. But there's still a lot of gaps in Polk County even. And then another one, which is Randolph County, probably a more served, but there's still hurdles there. There's still areas that need to be addressed by these funds. With all these fundings coming down through the infrastructure bill and ARPA dollars, this really is like once in a lifetime opportunity to get the infrastructure in place so that everybody has access to this. And so we want to make sure that nobody's left out of the maps. And to do that, we can also challenge the maps. We have processes that we're putting in place, and I know some counties may be doing this on their own, and we'd like to coordinate with those counties that using address NC for the addresses and using the statewide parcel fabric, the seamless parcels that have been kind of funneled up into the statewide data set, and with the building footprints coming out of emergency management and those things, we can start to take those statewide data sets that a lot of states don't really have. They don't have the benefit of all this great data. We can take that and start to identify where the FCC maps are missing locations. So if you're not on the map, we can't put funding to it based on how the federal laws have been written. So we need to make sure that everybody who needs to be on the map is on the map so we can make sure that we're addressing those needs. And so with that, we're starting to put together, we have a March 15th deadline for our first group of fabric challenges across the state. We're working on that, putting that into that schema and uploading that. And then Stephanie Jane led the effort on the availability challenges. I'll let her talk.
Sure, and I just want to mention there's two types of ways we're challenging the FCC maps, and one that Ben just described, the fabric challenges. We are tackling that as well as the broadband availability challenges. But we don't by any means feel that we have this just totally handled on our own. And part of the reason we're here is to invite you to collaborate with us and share what you know, because I know there are a lot of experts in the room with information that could be vital to this effort. So on behalf of the state, our office submitted 44,000, almost 45,000 locations for consideration in updating the FCC map, 43,000 of which were in what's called a bulk formal challenge, and here's a map of that. A lot of those are these fuchsia dots in the fixed wireless category, and this is only representing those that are kind of conveying that the locations are served when they really aren't, and they would be unserved if it weren't for that reported service that we found to be actually unavailable. We used web scraping technology for that analysis, and we checked DSL service reported locations as well. And just circling back to a lot of what we've said, maps are available, data layers are downloadable from NC1 Maps broadband page. So that's where I would encourage everyone to go, and you can download, if you're representing a county, the profile for your county, data sets that would be helpful, including the blue hexagon layer that Ben showed earlier. That's just been updated on our website, and you're going to see a whole lot of new things coming out on the NC1 Map broadband page. It's really easy to get to, so please take a look at that. And also, when you're there in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a sign-up form. There's way too much to say here and way too many questions or ideas that you might have that we don't have time to cover today. So we would love to hear from you directly, and we would love to have you sign up for updates from our office, which will include updates about new maps coming out, new data sets available that you may be able to use in your analyses. This is our last slide that kind of just covers some of the ideas we had on our call to action, like picture a bullhorn in one hand and a white flag in the other, like help, because we have so much opportunity here in a kind of unprecedented moment for developing internet access and digital equity for North Carolina. I've been in that space since 2010, so I have a little bit of a longitudinal perspective there. And Ben's going to tell you a little bit about the first part.
We just wanted to really emphasize that all the great data that is coming from the county, local governments, that is tremendous help to all of our programs that we're running at the state level. And so if you're contributing to Next Gen 911, thank you. I mean, all of that data that you're putting into that system, we're able to leverage through Address NC and other means in the statewide parcels, like I mentioned before. Attribution coming from that for land uses, improved value, structures, all of that information is going into all of these processes so we can challenge the right locations, get everybody onto that map. And Stephanie James is going to mention about the data pieces.
Yeah, we kind of spell it out here, and you may have ideas that are not listed here. We certainly welcome that input and those conversations. Don't be a stranger. We would love if you could help us get the word out about these efforts among the different agencies in your counties and regions, and the citizens who come in who are struggling with whatever aspect of access to technology they might have. Feel free to distribute the county profiles through your data service websites, our other maps that are available. You can help us participate in the challenge of FCC maps. We can submit challenges on your organization's behalf. We also can help you, guide you on encouraging citizens to submit individual map challenges to make sure the data is as correct as it possibly can be, because we're coming through in a wave of change and we don't want to have anyone missing out because they weren't in the official map that we're using as a guide or a reference. I mentioned sharing local data, infrastructure data that could include anchor institutions. Those are a very important part of our work. We're partnering with a lot of anchors on outreach, and we know from experience that our libraries and schools and local government facilities have ripple effects in the community. So we want to get broadband to and through those anchor institutions to create impact in each individual community. So we're going to be publishing very soon a statewide anchor institution inventory, and we'd love your input on any that are missing, those that are important to your part of the state, so we can add them and try to begin tracking our progress on sufficient connectivity for those locations. You may have some other data that you feel is of interest or concerns or questions. So we really ask you to stay in touch with our office and definitely sign up for updates. That is it from us, and we wanted to leave a couple minutes for questions.
Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
Talk about terrestrial connection. Does that mean literally, flat cable going to somebody's house, or does that cover like every 5 seconds you see a T-Mobile or a Verizon?
Yeah, terrestrial does cover, I mean, you can talk to us probably better than I can.
There's kind of some language called wireline for that physical cable that goes directly to the house, but then terrestrial can include other technology types like fixed wireless, and ultimately it's originating from the surface of the earth. Yeah.
How much percent-wise roughly is going towards the wireless side of the house versus the wireline part of the phone? Or does it depend on where you are in the county?
What portion of our efforts or what portion of coverage exists? Oh, well, I mean, I think that it changes, there's a lot happening. It's a very dynamic landscape. You may have more to add, but I think that wireless technologies are great with kind of pioneering access into an area that isn't feasible at this time for wireline, and then building demand to where you can have a sustainable model to bring in wireline. But yeah, some people who are solely reliant on mobile broadband access, and we do have maps of that too, are really limited in what they're able to achieve. And so we want to address that. We don't consider that full access.
Yeah, and past great grants have funded fixed wireless. Currently, the federal guidance, I think, with the scalability up to 100 symmetrical and things, those other requirements kind of limit the number of fixed wireless providers that can participate in those programs. But that's always a discussion that's evolving, and we're kind of beholden to what the federal guidelines are for that.
But we do have 90 million different categories you saw there, plus
Mhm.
fixed wireless, LEOs, any technology that's out there. The idea would be to run fiber. We're not going to run fiber all over North Carolina. Geography, everything else can prevent that. But we do have access to other technologies to get people to at least 100 down from that. And that's what that 90 million is targeted for.
Mhm.
Good question.
Good question.
So that brings us to the end of this session. Stephanie James, Ben will be around afterwards. We'll hit them up.
And we're going to switch right now to our next.